Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining me in this session uh, for our live sacred space uh, for the month of February 2023. As always, I am honored to be with you here in this time of sensitivity and uncertainty. And I look forward to sharing time with you here in our shared sacred space together today. Um, so the things we'll do today in our time together in sacred space is I have a couple of housekeeping announcements first I'll make, just a couple of seconds. Then we'll set sacred space. Then we'll talk about our overall topic for the session, which is the mystical dimension of love and desire. The mystical dimension of love and desire. We'll have our conversation. We'll have an exercise at the end, and then we'll close sacred space. So a couple of housekeeping items. In being led by my muse, there is a full complement of live, online, and in-person events coming up. Some have been announced, some have not been announced. And I just want to take this opportunity to let you all know just a quick rundown of everything going on. In about 3 weeks, we'll be having 2 weeks. We'll be having our full week-long retreat in Bali, the first week of March. Some of you have soft holds on a space or two. So technically, there's still a couple of places, spots open. But in general, if you're interested, let us know. And even if there's no more spots for Bali, there are other things coming up as well. The thing that will happen after Bali will be the month of April. We will have a month-long online cohort, and the theme will be the healing power of grief. The healing power of grief. I won't go into the full pitch here. Gary can maybe share the link where I talk about all four of the upcoming things. In May, we will have a month-long online cohort, and the theme of the May cohort will be becoming your child's trusted advisor. Becoming your child's trusted advisor. Whether they're 6 or 36 or 46, doesn't matter. So that's May. And then the last week of June, we will be in person in Paris. And we will have 2 3-day back-to-back retreats within a contiguous 7-day period. And the 2 retreats, the first one will be Paris, June 26th to 28th, 3-day retreat on healing your connection to money. And then we'll have a day break. And then June 30th to July 2nd, the second half of the week, we'll have another 3-day retreat, healing your connection to body. Healing your connection to body. You can do those retreats separately, one or the other. If you do both, it's what we're kind of jokingly calling our Health and Wealth Week in Paris in late June. And yeah, we'll be sending links out for that on email for you to sign up. If you know you would like to do one of those, just shoot me an email directly. We'll get you a link to make sure it doesn't get caught by a spam filter or lost in the queue, whatever. Gowrie will be doing her mothers and daughters online retreat. The way she's going to set it up is that it will be live. So we'll have to figure out time zones. March 25th and 26th. I think it's like 3 hours each day. And she's still working out the details of that, but that's generally what it's going to look like. Okay. So just letting you know all that. One cohort has been leading into another. So this weekend, we will be closing out our 12-week cohort on creating the life of your dreams that we started back in November. It's just been unbelievable. Bali will be the same topic, creating the life of your dreams, but in a 1 week long kind of format in person. And then that high level muse, manifestation, living in the sacred will be off the main burner for a while when we go into the blocking and tackling of grief, becoming an advisor to your children, healing your connection with money, healing your connection with body. But anyway, whatever you feel moved to do, go ahead and do, or nothing at all, that's fine, only if you want. But this is the path the muse has set us on, and we're just doing our best to follow it. Okay, so with that, all that aside, I will move into opening sacred space. And Gary, just to note, now I'm opening sacred space. No more links on the retreats. So if anyone wants more information, you can email us and we'll send them to you. But in sacred space, we'll refrain from putting those links up. Okay. So in opening sacred space, I'll just say that our intention here is to, actually, let me take this down as well. Our intention is to create a space together, which is devoid of fear, threat, and control, in order for us to open to higher guidance from within our own selves. Okay, this is what we would like to do. We would like to create a safe sanctuary space for all of us to be able to relax and surrender with no feeling of danger or threat, so that we can partake of the nourishment, the emotional nourishment and spiritual nourishment that comes from being in sacred space together as a group. And in opening sacred space together today, I will propose, as we always do, that as we move into sacred space, we all follow the 4 principles of Presidian sacred space. Number 1, confidentiality. Standard Vegas rules: what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. What happens in sacred space stays in sacred space. Online, we do that via anonymization. So you can come in, change your username to something else if you want. You don't have to. And then continue chatting and asking questions anonymously. The second principle is that as much as possible, we try to refrain from giving each other or even to ourselves any feeling of threat, controlling, fixing, tough love. Obviously, ill-intentioned, we refrain from that, but also well-intentioned. So even if I'm trying to do something for your own good, but I'm trying to control you, telling you what to do, low-key threatening you, well, if you don't read this book, blah, 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 something bad is going to happen. We don't do that. Not because it's bad, but because in sacred space, the point of sacred space is to be free of fear, threat, and control from any source, even from within, so that we can get the things done that you can only get done in sacred space for an hour or two. And then after that, we can go back into profane space and start wagging our fingers at each other again. Okay. So no interventions, no fixing, no tough love. We are holding space for each other to be however as we are, and to be okay with that and hold space for that. The third principle, which is corollary to the first two, is no commerce. So nothing may be sold. I can't sell you anything. Gary can't sell you anything. Please refrain from selling things to each other in the chat. And this goes for things that you sell, but also things that you recommend. So even if I recommend a book for some question you have, and I don't get any financial benefit from it, we refrain from that also. Because any recommendation, any sales pitch is a veiled threat, however well-meaning. If I'm selling you hair tonic and I say you want to get hair like mine, you have to have this hair tonic, it's a veiled threat. If you don't buy the hair tonic, you won't get hair. Okay. Again, nothing intrinsically wrong with that. But in sacred space, or creating a space where a priori that does not happen. Said another way, we are here for your energy, not for the things you bring. We're here for what you are, not for what you do or provide. And the fourth principle, no expectation of participation, related to the first three. So there's no pressure to do anything, to chat or not chat, to stay or not stay, to invite your friends, not invite your friends. Again, the nourishment comes from the held space and our collective presence and attention. from what you are, not from what you do or provide. And all of us together will tend to amplify that. So this is what I propose. And if you are not okay with that, that's totally okay. There's no fear, threat, and control whipping you to come to sacred space or stay to sacred space. But in the next 30 seconds or so, we will be moving into that sacred space. And so if you're not okay with that, this would be the time to withdraw. So we'll pause right now, give everyone a moment to make your selection. Okay, either way. Totally okay either way. Okay. Okay. And so then for the rest of us, we will now move forward together into our shared sacred space. And as we cross the threshold now into our shared sacred space, I will just remind everyone, myself included, of the 4 principles of Presidian sacred space: confidentiality/anonymization, no fear, threat, and control, no fixing, no tough love, no commerce, no recommendations, and no expectation of participation. Welcome back. Welcome back to our monthly sacred space. You may notice that next in the calendar, our next sacred space is not until February 2nd, I think. And that's because both Gary and I will be traveling. I'm flying out next week actually for Kuala Lumpur. Then we'll be in Bali for the retreat. Then I'm actually going to be in Australia, in Perth and Brisbane, my first time in Australia, meeting some advisees, hanging out, and just getting a lay of the land over there. So we won't do sacred space again until early February. So our session topic for this session will be the mystical dimension of love and desire. The mystical dimension of love and desire. So for this month's mythopoetic story, Gary selected an ancient Egyptian version of a Greek epic. Fascinating. Which led us to examine the functions of mythopoetics itself and the pleasure of reading a myth for no good reason, for no utility value. And the golden thread of the story then led us into this deeper exploration of the nature of reality vis-a-vis the role of love and desire, and how love and desire helps to form the foundation of our experience of reality. Okay. Okay, so with that, I'll invite Gary on screen to tell us about the story she selected and to tell us the story as well. I'm super excited because I've only heard it once, and it was the first time I've heard this Egyptian version, and I'm excited to hear it again. Hi, Gary.
Hi, Artie.
Thanks for being back.
Hi.
Your sound's great. Your video is great.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you. Yeah, so it was a first time for me as well when I found this story. I'd never heard of a version like this that it even existed, and then I went digging all over the place trying to find sources and find different corroborations to what I just read.
And what is it? Tell us what it is. Yeah.
Yes, it's called The Story of the Greek Princess, and it is the story of Helen of Troy, but from an Egyptian perspective. And when I read it, I was like, my mind was just blown away. I was reading it, like, wow, this even exists. So, story legend has it that there are 2 versions, even in the Greek mythology. There are 2 versions of what happened with Helen. And one version is what we know, with Homer's Iliad, and also in popular culture. There's so many movies and so many retellings of the Trojan War. It appears even in the Odyssey, right? Because of Odysseus' own journey back home. So there are so many retellings of this tale. We know that version of what happened. But apparently there is another version in ancient Greek mythology where Helen was supposed to have been hiding in Egypt.
The whole time.
the whole time. I'm not spoiling it, but and Herodotus writes about this version, and he even goes to say that Homer chose the other version against this Egyptian version simply because the other version was more sensational. It lent itself to more drama, you know. So, and that is why this wasn't talked about much. So that's what I got when I looked into this, and I was
Even
like,
Homer's got to eat. Even Homer's got to eat.
so yeah, so that's the story
Desire.
I have. I have it in this form, where it's told from the perspective of the Egyptian pharaoh and how they discovered Helen and what happened. Okay.
All right. Will you tell us the story?
Yeah. So the story of the Greek princess. Right. So in the days of all of this goings on with what was happening in Greece and Troy, Seti II was the pharaoh of Egypt. And one day there came a great ship driven by a storm from the north, and it sought shelter in the mouth of the Nile. And as the ship anchored at this place, there was a temple to the god Hershef, who watched over strangers, who protected strangers and travelers. And also, even if sailors or even slaves sought sanctuary in this temple, the god would protect them, even from their own contract to their masters, right? So the slaves could vow to serve the god and they would be free of their master. And so in this context, when this ship reached the shore and the warden of the place went out to investigate, some of the sailors stepped out and said, we would like to seek sanctuary in the temple of Hershef. So the warden was curious. He said, well, if your ship's in trouble, wouldn't you want to get help and go back home? Why would you want to seek shelter in the temple? And the sailors said, well, the thing is, the master of the ship, he's a prince, and he's carried off the wife of one of the kings of Greece, and together with treasure. And we are afraid that we will incur the wrath of the gods if we carry on with him. And that's why we want to seek sanctuary. And this warden was shocked by this news. And the sailor said, well, the thing is, he carried off the wife of one of the kings of Greece when he was actually entertained in the palace as a guest and as ambassador. So that's what makes this whole thing completely unacceptable. And the warden agreed. Well, I can't say that I've ever heard of such behavior, whether it's in a foreign land or even in our land. So he seized the ship and he said, I will have to report this to the pharaoh. And when the pharaoh Seti heard of all this, he wanted to immediately, he get the ship up the Nile to Memphis. I'd like to talk to the prince. I'd like to talk to the sailors. And they were all brought to the great hall where the pharaoh sat. And so he first spoke to the prince. And he said, I hear that you are the son of a great king. And I hear that there's some misfortune has befallen your ship, and that's how you ended up here. But what happened? I'd like to hear your story. And the prince was Paris, and he introduced himself, and he said, I'm the son of King of Troy. I had been to Greece, and I have won myself this beautiful woman as my wife, and I'm taking her back to Troy. And as he was saying that, he said, well, this woman is the princess of Sparta, and she was given to me by her father, King Tyndareus. So the sailors around started to murmur. They're not very happy with what they heard. And then the pharaoh turned to them and asked them what their story was. And they said, what the prince said is not true. Helen is the daughter of King Tyndareus of Sparta, that's true. But several years ago, she had many suitors from all lands. And people were fighting not just over her beauty, but also because whoever married her would become king of Sparta. And finally, it was settled. King Tyndareus agreed to give Helen to Menelaus, and Menelaus would become king of Sparta. At the same time, all the suitors agreed to swear by Menelaus that they would abide by him, abide by his choice, and also protect Helen if anyone ever tried to steal her, because, you know, she was considered to be the most beautiful woman in the world. And so they always foresaw something like this happening. But Paris was not among the suitors that day. So he was not even a contender in that sense. And as soon as he heard this, Paris started getting flustered. And he said, no, that's not true. Helen is with me of her own free will. She told me that she hated her husband and she wanted to come away with me. So I'm not forced her to come. And the Pharaoh said, well, I've already heard 2 versions from you. So I don't think I believe you. And I'm going to have to talk to you again. But until then, please rest at the royal guest house. But I'll come back to you. And then he turned around. He wanted to go and meet the princess to hear her story. So meanwhile, when all of this entourage was in the great hall, Helen was taken to the temple of Hathor, the goddess, the sky goddess, and she was sheltered over there. And so the Pharaoh went to the temple of Hathor to talk to her. His own daughter was the high priestess at this temple. And so she was protecting her. And he went up to the temple and spoke to Helen and wanted to know what her story was. And Helen, when she saw the Pharaoh, started to weep. And she said, I'm here against my will. And I was happily married to Menelaus. I have 2 children. And Paris used shape-shifting magic to sort of disguise himself as Menelaus and lured me away to the ship. And by the time I realized it was too late, so I'm actually abducted from my house. And so please, I beg you, please do not let Paris take me to Troy. Please let me stay here until my husband comes back, comes and takes me back. And when the Pharaoh heard this, he was very moved. And so he addressed his daughter, the high priestess, as well as Helen, and said, this is my promise, that you will be protected and you can live here as long as you want, as long as you like, until your husband comes to claim you. But also, this is my word, we will never let Paris steal you from here, or anyone else, or any other land. Because if they try to, they will meet their death. And so saying, leaving her at the temple, where she would stay then from then on, he went back to his hall and he ordered that the prince leave with his ship immediately, back out into the sea, back to his homeland, and he would not get any of the treasure that he brought with him, and he would definitely not be able to take Helen back. And Paris was furious, and he said, no, I'm going up north, up the river, and wait until I can take Helen back. And all of those protests, but he couldn't do a thing. As soon as he got into the ship, as though by magic, started to move out into the sea, and he had to go back. Now, as this was happening, at the temple of Hathor, as the high priestess knelt down and worshipped the goddess, suddenly there was a light, and behind her, a form appeared. So she turned around and looked, and there was the god of wisdom, the messenger god Thoth, who appeared before her and said, Well, you have witnessed all that happened until now. I have come to relay this message to you from Amen-Ra. And he says, you will come to witness a lot more in the coming years. Helen will stay here, and you will eventually become the Queen of Egypt at some time, and you will have to continue to protect her. Menelaus will come someday to claim his wife. But before that, there's going to be a long war fought between Greece and Troy. And at the end of it, Troy will be in ruins. This is how the gods see it. And the war will be fought over Helen, over the beauty of Helen, but not the real Helen, because the real Helen will be here in this temple. And what I've been told to do by Amen-Ra, whom the Greeks know as Zeus, is to draw the spirit essence of Helen, what the Egyptians called Ka, to draw it out, to draw a likeness of her. It's almost like a phantom likeness, what the Greeks called eidolon. And take this fake Helen back to the ship where Paris is sailing back to Troy. And then the story will continue from there. And so saying, Thoth vanished. And he went to Helen, where Helen was resting, and drew this Ka out of her. And he went out of the temple. And as all of this happened, Helen continued to stay at the temple. She was there for years and years. And what happened was, Seti, the pharaoh, he died. His son came to the throne and became king. And Tosert, the high priestess, his daughter, became the queen of Egypt. And Helen continued to stay there. 10 years of long war was fought between Greece and Troy. There were tragedies, there were losses, there were deaths. All of that happened. And then Tosert had a son, Ramses II. Now, he became the pharaoh. And as soon as he came to the throne, he forgot all about the vows and oaths of everything his father and grandfather stood by. And he said, because Helen hadn't aged a day. I mean, she still looked absolutely wonderful. She was still the same beautiful woman. It was 17 years later now. And she still looked exactly the same as she did when she landed there. So he said, this is the most beautiful woman on the planet, and she'll be mine. I'm going to marry her. And the high priestess, his mother now, right? After she had given up the throne, she had gone back to the temple to be the high priestess. She tried to dissuade him, telling him this was wrong, that they had an oath to stand by. And he would listen to none of it. And finally, as the last straw, so she was clutching at straws now, and she said, all right, I know that you're not going to listen to me, but what if, have you considered, what if her husband is still alive? And so that finally kind of did the thing. He was a little worried about that, if that would be the right thing to do. But he was determined, so he said he would consult his magicians to find out about Menelaus, if he was still alive or not. And meanwhile, as the high priestess at the temple turned around, she saw a shipwrecked sailor standing at the door of the temple. She looked to him and asked him where he came from. And she was surprised, because this was generally not the temple that shipwrecked sailors came to. They would go to the temple of Hershef. So she spoke to him and asked him why he had come there. And he knelt before her and he said, I'm Menelaus. I have been told to come here and talk to the high priestess. And so she was like taken aback, and she wanted to know who told him to come all this way. And Menelaus said, well, you know what, I had a long water fight. And after that, for 7 years, we were going back home, and our ship had been kind of rocked by the sea, thrown about here and there. And finally, we kind of shipwrecked. We landed at an island close to the mouth of the Nile. And we were resting in a cave all night. And when I woke up in the morning, my wife, Helen, over whom we'd fought all these years, had disappeared. She had simply vanished. And I didn't know what to do. I was torn with shock and grief, because everything that I had fought for, all of that was futile. So I was about to kill myself. And that's when Hermes, and I hear that he's called Thoth in this land. So Hermes appeared and he said, don't worry. Your wife's not vanished. She was, she's not disappeared. She was never found in the first place. And so I asked him what he meant. And he said, the woman you fought over was not the real Helen. The real Helen has been in Egypt all along. And so if you want to find her, go to the temple of Hathor in Memphis, speak to the high priestess there, and you will find her. And so I've come here finally. Is this story true? And is my wife here? And so the priestess took him to Helen and said, this is your wife. And all that your God told you was true. I was there when Helen landed here. And I was there when Thoth told me that he will have to take the car of Helen to Troy and leave her here under my protection. And so Menelaus went completely mad with joy. He saw Helen, he went and hugged her, and he wanted to make sure that she was all solid in his hands. She was not a spirit, she was not a ghost. And he said, is this really you? And Helen was overjoyed. But then she said, we have one final thing still keeping us apart, because the pharaoh, who is the son of this high priestess, apparently wants to marry me. So we have that problem still. And Menelaus turned to the high priestess and said, is this okay with you? And she said, no, it isn't. So I'm going to help you. You must plan an escape, and you must do it in a sort of a cunning way. So let's figure out a scheme. And they all put their heads together and planned a scheme. And so the next morning, when Ramses came to the temple, Menelaus pretended to be a shipwrecked sailor. He stood a respectful distance away from Helen. And Helen was in mourning clothes with her hair open. When Ramses came to her, Helen said, I have sad news that the sailor has brought to me. My husband is dead. His ship was wrecked by the storm, and his body was taken out into the sea. And hearing this, Ramses obviously is delighted. He's like, oh, that's great news. We can get married now. And Helen says, well, very well, I can't say no to that, but I have a request. My husband was king, after all, and he deserves a final farewell that befits a king. And I must mourn him in the right way. And after I've done that, I can marry you. But I need your help. And Ramses is like, at this point, it's like, ask me anything. I'm so happy. I'll give you whatever you ask. And she says, well, I need a ship with men and sailors and enough food for everyone so that, this will be the funeral feast. I need a sacrificial bull, and I need, men to help out and everything. And I will go on that ship. And this funeral will be performed on sea because that's where he died. So once we sacrifice the bull to the gods and then, put a spirit to rest, I will return and then we can get married. So Ramses is absolutely happy to do that. He gets the ship ready. The ship is loaded. The sacrificial bull is on board, and people get on board. Helen goes on board. Menelaus, still in disguise of the sailor, goes on board. And after a few days, Ramses gets this message. There are a few men who come back, and they say, we've been sent back by Helen. They're on their way to Greece, by the way. And they said, because Menelaus is still alive, she couldn't marry you. And they sacrificed the bull to Poseidon so that they can get a safe passage back home. And when Ramses heard this, he was absolutely mad. He was like, I've been cheated, right? This is not how it's done. And I will do anything to win her back. And he was full of rage, full of despair. And at this point, Thoth appeared before him. And he said, Pharaoh Ramses, all these strange happenings that have been going on, all of this was by the will of Amen-Ra. And by his command, Helen landed here, right? By his command, she resided in the temple of Hathor. And it even came to be known everywhere as the temple of the foreign Hathor, right? By his command, I was sent to draw her car and take it to Troy. By his command was all of the war between the peoples of the sea. And by his command, Helen goes back to Greece. And so you should abide by this. And so when he saw this, Ramses bowed to the will of Amen-Ra, bowed to Thoth for bringing him the message. And he heaped great honors on the high priestess of the temple. And the temple was then, after that, held in high regard all over Egypt. So that's the story. Artie, would you want to come back on? Hi.
Hey. Whew. Thank you. That was even better the second time around.
Thank you.
Okay, so let me start with the usual jumping off point, which is where do you enter into that story?
Yeah, like I said, it was just, I was so completely taken aback when I read the story. To realize, because the way the story opens up, you don't immediately get to know this is about Paris and Helen, right? And as the sailors start telling the story to the pharaoh, that's when you kind of think, wait a minute, is this what I think it is? So that curiosity got me into it, and I absolutely loved this perspective. Because for me, I've not read the Iliad in a long time, but the Trojan War is just so popular in culture, right? So you always know that story is always top of mind. But for me, Iliad, when I read in college, was always this war saga, this saga of heroes, of sacrifice, of glory, of tragedies, of Achilles, right? Of Hector and all of these tragic deaths. That's how I always thought about the Trojan War. So it wasn't exactly this magical myth fairy tale for me. And this version, there's just so much magic, right? And all of it, the entire story is told from the gods' perspective. This is not the story of mortals. This is the story of the gods. This is about Thoth. This is about Hermes. This is about Hathor / Aphrodite, as she is known in Greece, right? This is their story, and the mortals are just actors in that whole drama. So that's That's the feeling I got, and it had this very assuring, very comforting feeling at the end, where I mean, it's almost got this quality of Indian Puranic stories, where there's a particular story that comes to me, but I'll talk about that later. But where Vishnu and his Maya illusion is the one that's kind of playing out all of these drama in the world, and it's like it's all okay at the end of the day. It's all an illusion. It's fine. And it was all the gods kind of playing around with all of our lives, and it's okay. It's no big deal. It's fine. You're fine. The world is fine. The gods are fine. Everything is fine. So it's that feeling that I got from the story, and yeah, it was lovely to read it, and I really enjoyed it. So I thought,
I love this. Thank you. So, yeah, I agree. So typically when we read one of these stories, we talk about Helen as the inner feminine, Paris, all the masculines as the inner masculine, Hathor as the inner. That's fine. We could definitely read this as an inner masculine, inner feminine story within our own selves. But this was such a stunning story to me because, first of all, we had no choice. I mean, we usually already have no choice. Your muse just gives you the story and we go. But here it's like, to hear like the Egyptian version of the Helen of Troy story, it's like, there's no, obviously we're going to do that. How are we not going to read that, right? So we go into it. And for me, the most stunning thing was that the Trojan War was fought over an illusion. Right? All the other detail just like fell away. I was just like, after you said that, the rest of the story, I was just like, blah, 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 blah. I was just not even listening. I was just in a state of being stunned because for us, Western modern society, right, the Iliad is one of the pillars, right? It's basically like the Iliad, the Odyssey, and the first edition of the Gutenberg Bible, right? That's it. Maybe Shakespeare First Folio, right? But that's it. Those are the pillars of like modern Western literary tradition, blah, 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 blah. And so when it takes this and strikes at the heart of the Iliad and Odyssey, basically, and says this whole circumambulation was over an illusion, a wisp of smoke, and yet was still valid. This pitched me back into the mystical dimension of reading this myth, right? And for this, I go back to Joseph Campbell and his framework around the 4 functions of myth. And I'll just go into that very briefly here just to set the stage. So Joe Campbell, 4 functions of myth: metaphysical, cosmological, sociological, and psychological. And I'll start from the bottom up. Psychological is how we have been reading our myths. Inner masculine, inner feminine, looking at the pattern, looking at symbol, not allegory, sacred, not profane, etc., etc. Sociological, the next level up, is when enough people have keyed into their own inner archetypal image, and then they find that this archetypal image is common to others. A society forms around that. Right? For instance, a myth underpinning the sociological level of modern society, the Western world, is the Judeo-Christian system of myth. Right, where there's this God that becomes man, he's killed, he rises from the dead, and then he ascends into heaven, into the sky. Right, scientifically, it's like, okay, right, but that is the underpinning archetypally of the modern sort of Western world. There's a Hindu system, a mythical system that underpins Hindu sociology. There's an Egyptian system. There's the Celtic system, et cetera. It's a Western European tradition. But what we have been doing in this series, for the most part, is reading myths across world traditions and bringing them to a psychological level, a mythopoetic inner level, finding commonalities, bringing together the common roots, and realizing these are, because we're like, oh my gosh, the Japanese tale and the Chinese tale and the Indian tale and the Aboriginal Australian and West African and North American tales, the Grimm brothers tales, the Greek myths, the Norse myths have all these commonalities. The physics of how things work on each other are common and consistent. And we're shocked. But then this brings us to a deeper realization that the reason the physics are common is because the common denominator across all of these human world traditions is the human. Right? So these are human-based archetypes. So we've been diving into the sociological myths, reading them on a personal mythopoetic level, and all the commonalities come out. Perfect. That's level 2. Level 3 is cosmological, where the myth serves to explain the image of the world of reality around us. Right? The modern myth of the cosmos and how everything is set up is based on reason and scientific method. The myth of reason and scientific method. By myth, I don't mean false. Right? By myth, I mean archetypal pattern. Right? But science and the Big Bang, where we only look at a slice of the universe, out of our entire human experience, we focus only on the sliver of a slice, 0.001%, that is actually measurable, predictable, repeatable, and controllable, which is the core of the scientific method. And anything that falls out about, anything that's not measurable, not predictable, not repeatable, not controllable, which is basically everything, right? We hand wave and say, that's outside the hermetic seal of our experiment laboratory, and we just call it random chance, which is just a fancy way of knowing we have no friggin' idea why. But the reality is that this part that is we don't understand, we can't control and predict, is like 99% of the rest of the universe that falls out of that. And we just ignore it. Because even in the 0.1% slice, we can control and predict. It's been, at least on a physical material level, has been fabulously successful. And it works. So like monkeys, we keep hitting the lever because the food pellet keeps coming out. Even though hitting the lever is like devoiding us of the non-material element. Puts us more and more in the profane, loss of soul, all the rest of it. But anyway, every cosmological mythic system, not just the scientific, has its flaws and fatal flaws. And that's fine. That's humanity, right? That's welcome. Welcome to the club. So those are the first 3 levels. So these first 3 levels are describing the nature of reality at varying levels of zoom in and magnification. Psychological is, how do I personally deal with this? How do I move through the 3 or 4 phases of life? How do I get through midlife crisis? How do I figure out how to heal my inner childhood wounds? Fine. Sociological is the next level of zoom. How do we organize ourselves, multiple, as a collective? Right? A lot of the disorientation we have in our modern world is because in the West, at least, we are built on the Judeo-Christian patriarchal sociological archetype and the scientific archetype, and the two have not been mythically integrated. Right? So it's like, so how could Jesus have ascended into the sky? After 2,000 years, he would still not even be out of the solar system, right? Like describing 2 different planes of reality that are not integrated. Are they integratable? Absolutely. Are these 2, would these 2 be my top picks for the easiest to integrate, right? I don't think so, right? But this, you don't get to choose. This is why people feel lost. This is why what we do here in Sacred Space and the work we do feels centering to some people, because we bring the myths back to forget mystical, cosmological, sociological. We bring them back to internal within us, mythopoetic, where everything starts to make sense within you, and then we expand back out. Okay, it's like a bellows, like a lung, like a labyrinth going in and out, cyclical forever and ever. Okay. And as a by the way, that's why when people ask me, well, Artie, you spend a lot of time thinking about this stuff. What do you think about our current disorder, the polarization of our political sphere and technology and AI? And I just look at it as, as a father, as a citizen, I'm concerned and all the rest of it. But at this mythopoetic level, I'm like, we're just in a certain phase of our cycle, right? Of sort of arguably decline, but over the last 3,000-4,000 years, not just over the last 30 or 40. And for me, at this level of Zoom, every part of the cycle is beautiful in its own way, right? Every part of the life cycle of the universe is beautiful in its own way. So anyway, these first three perspectives and functions, the psychological, sociological, and cosmological, are fabulously useful. Right? Said another way, they deal with our needs and wants. When we talk about needs, wants, and desires, these first three deal with our needs and wants. Said another way, they are more of the profane. There is a sacred dimension to all three, but we pursue them because they are useful. Right? Even this live sacred space, you come because it's comforting, it helps you get insight into your life. You're not really here for no good reason, okay? We pursue these because they're useful. They help us organize ourselves as a society. They help us go through the individual stages of the arc of life. And they help us orient ourselves in the universe. Now, the fourth function, which is the metaphysical function. And I want to be careful here. Not everything I'm saying here is attributable to Campbell. I'm just using his 4 levels of mythic function as a leaping off point. After these 3 levels, we come to the mystical level. And this ties back to the Tao Te Ching session I did like 2 years ago, where we talk about the true nature of reality, probably 3 years ago at this point. Now, this mystical level is the level at which this story, the Egyptian story of Helen, really hits me in the head and really speaks to me. For us in the modern world, the story is not going to be cosmological or sociological. The ancient Greek and ancient Egyptian civilizations are far, far away. We could read it as inner masculine and feminine, psychological, mythopoetic. But given the recurring appearance and disappearance of Helen / Aphrodite / Hathor, the goddess of love, basically, this to me is a mystical story about the action of Eros in our world. So at a very fundamental level, at the psychological level, you can say, well, Eros comes in, scrambles everything. We fight for 10 years, this epic pillar of the modern world, modern civilization, the Iliad, the Homeric Iliad, the Trojan War, is all just a dream. Right? And so we can talk about circumambulation, that if you caught up in a big love affair, this is the kind of shit that will happen. And that's fine. We can read it like that. But at the mystical level, when you encounter a myth and it speaks to you at the mystical level, the 3 other layers fall away. And the way the story comes to us is itself kind of alluring and erotic, because we're all mythopoetic nerds, and there's nothing nerdier than the Iliad and Homeric Iliad and Greek myth. So when the story comes as the Egyptian version of the Greek story of Helen, and Egypt, of course, is the precursor. The Egyptian pantheon is the precursor of the Greek pantheon. Right? Thoth translates into Hermes. Hathor translates into Aphrodite. Amun-Ra translates into Zeus. And the Egyptian system is much older than the Hellenic. So this is like the original story, the inside baseball version of the story of how can you resist? Everything else gets thrown out the window. Of course, we're going to do that story. We don't even know where it's going to lead us. We're doing a story. So even in the presentation of the story, it's Eros working here in forcing us really to move forward. And with the story, go ahead.
When you said this the first time, I was a little taken aback that this was the workings of love and Eros, even in the presentation of the story, and even the fact that we got lured into the story because of that. And I thought about this, and I've been thinking about it all weekend, because it gave me a very real clue into how desire works at the level of the golden thread and at the level of bliss. Like when I'm sitting down and doing this exercise, what is my desire, and how does that inform my bliss? All of that sounds very intellectual, right? It's like, oh, how do I figure out my desire, and how do I figure out my bliss? But then you say this, like, I just read the story, it was delightful, and I could not resist bringing this to you, and I couldn't resist bringing it to the Sacred Space session, because it's just so much pleasure, and this is what I desire.
It's a feeling of compulsion in your body. Yeah. That's real bliss.
That's real bliss, and that is the workings of eros and love and desire in this whole thing. And I was like, wow, okay, that's such a real feeling of what that is like. So thank you for that.
Yeah, and here, I mean, even trying to put this into words for this live session, I'm stumped. It's hard. Speech and thought tend to fall away.
Yeah.
But because a story like this comes to me and presents to me a picture of truth and reality that's so profound that it fails to do anything useful to inform our sense of the cosmos, the society, our society, the workings of the psyche. Everything I'm about to say to you is not really useful in your journey to like self-help and be a better person, or find your bliss or whatever. Not directly anyway. So it's not useful. This stuns me for no good reason, no good profane reason. And it's fascinating because the Tao Te Ching talk was to talk about the baseline expression of the nature of reality. And I've always wondered, in the 3 years since that talk, what part 2 would look like. I mean, there's a million different ways intellectually I can go from that, but this is the first story that did that. This story goes one level above it. This is the level where we have a picture of the mechanics of how the ground of reality, just minding its own business, everything is just fine, starts to be stirred up into the phenomenological world of, in the Taoist phrase, the 10,000 things of all the world around us. That stirs up desire and me and not me, and the fear of not me, right? The clinging to me, all these things. As you move from non-duality to duality, even though nothing is actually changing underneath. You're stirring the butter. The butter is unchanged. You're just stirring it, right? And it's getting thicker. It's getting more solid, seemingly. It's still the same butter. After a while, leads us to, the one thing, right? The headline of the Tao Te Ching talk is that there is only one thing that actually exists. There is no second thing, right? And when you hear statements of this from, say, Lakshmanji, the sort of scion of the Kashmir Shaivism tradition, he was just out of nowhere, just in the middle of a talk, he was explaining the nature of reality, and his followers were like, yeah, but what about this? And he's like, yeah, he explained that very technical thing. And then there's offhand, he's like, yeah, I mean, nothing moves. And I was stunned. I was like, that's so good. As a side point, nothing moves. Of course, nothing moves. There's only one thing. For something to move, you have to have the thing and the background. And when it moves, and obviously nothing moves because there are no two things. There's only one thing. And when you see movement, which is even the experience of time, because time is counting and movement, it's an illusion. But you are an illusion too. So when something hits you in the face, it still hurts like hell. So it's valid, right? It's valid. So that's the Tao Te Ching level. And this story takes up to one level above it. At this level, we have a picture of the mechanics of how the ground of reality starts to be stirred up into the phenomenological world. That after a while, after millions of years, leads this one thing to be manifested as like you and me and the people running the internet and all of you sitting in the audience, sitting here as feeling like ourselves, listening to this, maybe being in trance, maybe being bored. I don't know. On a Sunday morning. Right? All of us, every one of us, as an expression of this one unmoving reality. Every rock, every tree, every pixel, every point of light glistening off your keyboard or phone are all part of this. And it's not this intellectualized, goopy, homogeneous jello of blob of purple jello, the ground of being or enlightenment or whatever. The ground of being, the only one thing, is fabulously detailed. Right? There are, in the words of the Tao Te Ching, 10,000 things, all the different textures, flavors, everything, feelings, everything. Right? So at a sociological level, the Iliad is like a corner of civilization. And so with this story, we take the Iliad. When you take the Trojan War and the Homeric Iliad, and you said it was all for a dream, right? Not just the story is a mythic dream, but the actors in the story were themselves chasing a dream. That pushes this to the mystical level, where all of our current sociological reality is a dream. All of our thoughts of what's fair, masculine, feminine, patriarchy, matriarchy, right or wrong, social injustice. How do I get over my childhood wounding? How do I find and follow my bliss? Right? Am I really following my bliss, or am I just following the bully of prestige? All of that falls away. And this myth gives you a peek into the wonder unveiled in its most raw form. This is the function of myth. This is the function of poetry, to put into words things that are unspeakable. And so this story, to explain this, I'm struggling to find words, and one of the ways was to read a passage from a book, which is called The King and the Corpse, Heinrich Zimmer, and edited by Joseph Campbell. So this is the story. Heinrich Zimmer, the great German Indologist, was a dear friend of Joseph Campbell, kind of a mentor to Joseph Campbell in a way. He died an untimely death, and after his death, Joe Campbell worked with his Zimmer's widow to collect all the scraps of notes from his desk, unfinished works, random ass ideas, and started editing them. Even his great masterpiece, the Philosophies of India, right, on the shelf back there, is Heinrich. It's his magnum opus, and it was edited, post-mortem by Joseph Campbell. And in all of these, Joe Campbell is very unspeakably graciously authors everything to Zimmer, and he just puts himself as the editor, when he's really writing basically half of it, because stitching together all these random ass post-its and ideas and everything. Okay. So anyway, The King of the Corpse is just a random collection of bits and bobs, bits and pieces, which is just this masterwork to me. And in one of these, it records Zimmer's telling, or an essay about the Kalika Purana, which is a story from Hindu tradition of how desire was created. And one aspect of it is how desire was created. When Brahma, one of the myths in this book, is the story of Brahma, when he was creating the world, and in this process, spontaneously out of nowhere, this god falls out of him, basically Eros. Okay, and I just want to read you a little bit of this to try and give you a flavor of what I'm trying to communicate, because it's very hard to put into words. So, all right, so Brahma is here sitting in meditation, creating the world out of nowhere. Okay. And Brahma, sinking still deeper into the limbic darkness of his own interior, deep in meditation, struck a new depth. And when he struck this new depth, suddenly the most beautiful dark woman sprang from his vision and stood naked before everyone's gaze. She was dawn, she was radiant with vivid youth, and describes how perfect, how beautiful, a consort fit for a wife, queen, wife fit for the god of love. She was glowing with little delicate pearls of perspiration. And when she found herself in the midst of her startled audience, she stared about them in uncertainty and then broke into a softly rippling laugh. Brahma became aware of her, arose from his yogic posture, and fastened on her a long and earnest gaze. Then, with his physical eyes still fixed upon her, the creator permitted his spiritual vision to fall back again into his own profundity, his depths. And he searched to know what task this apparition, this illusion, would be in the further unfoldment of the work of creation to whom she would belong. So this thing comes out of him. And he's like, WTF, what is this going to do? Note, he does not feel desire. Yeah, no one does. When lo, a second surprise, out of Brahma's inner search sprang another being, this time a youth, a male youth, splendid, dark, strong. His limbs were powerful and beautifully formed. His heroic chest with his great pectoral muscles, like a panel of mahogany. His hips were neat and trimmed. It just goes on and on. It's like beautiful. He gave forth an aroma of blossoms. He was like an elephant stung with vehement desire. He has his bow and 5 flowered arrows, right? You get the idea. And so the minute this dude shows up, everyone around the royal chamber, each felt himself beginning to be moved with a secret burning longing to possess not the boy, but the woman. So it was that desire first made its way into the world. This new arrival, charming and not the least bit shy, turned his handsome face to Brahma, bowed and inquired, and I quote this on Insta sometimes as a statement of like how to think about your bliss. What am I to do? Please instruct me. A being flourishes only when performing the work for which he is designed. Bliss. Let me read that again. A being flourishes only when performing the work for which he is designed. Assign to me an appropriate name, give me an abode, and since you are the creator of all things, a wife. Brahma, this is the all-powerful, meditative, enlightened creator of the world. Brahma remained silent for a moment, astounded by his own production. He was like, what? He's like, oh, what? What had slipped from him? What was this? Then he's like, okay, keep it together, Brahma, keep it together. He's like, then he gathered and constrained his consciousness. Because the thing with Brahma is he is truth. He only speaks the truth. Then he gathered and constrained his consciousness and brought his mind again to center. Surprise was conquered. Again in mastery, the world creator, speaking the truth, addressed his remarkable creature and assigned him to his field. You will go wandering about the earth, striking bewilderment into men and women with your flower bow and shafts, and in this way bring to pass the continuous, not linear, not end of days, the continuous creation of the world. No God, no heavenly spirit, demon or evil spirit, serpent, divinity, or nature sprite, neither man nor beast, neither the flying nor the swimming creatures shall be inaccessible to your aim. And I myself, as well as all-pervading Vishnu, even his boss above him, even Shiva, the rock-like immovable ascetic, steeped in his meditation, we three shall be given into your power. Not to speak of the other breathing existences. You shall drive impalpable to the heart and arouse their delight in this way, provoking the ever-renewed creation of the living world. For the heart is to be the target of your bow, and your arrows are to carry joy and intoxication to all breathing beings. This, then, is your task. You'll perpetuate the moment of the world creation that I've already started. You're going to continue it. Receive now, O highest being, the name that befits you. And his courtiers basically say, okay, what are we going to name this guy? And they're like, you'll be known in the world as the churner of the spirit. The churner of the spirit. Another name shall be the desire of love. Another name shall be the intoxicator. Etc., etc. And then basically he said, other names, desire, kama, the god of love, the exciter, a paroxysm of desire, the inflamer, the infatuator, the parcher, the carrier of death, all the same thing, all the same thing. And so just to go a little bit further here, having heard the words of Brahma and getting his name and his job and everything, he instantly made himself invisible. And then he was like, well, all right then, fucking let's go. He says, right here, and without a moment's delay, I will prove upon these holy ones, upon the Creator himself, the supernal power that Brahma has assigned to me. Here they all stand, and here is this magnificent woman, Dawn. They shall be made, every one, the victims of my weapon. For has not Brahma himself just declared to me, I and Vishnu and even Shiva will be given into the power of your shafts? Why then should I wait for other targets? What Brahma has made known, I will bring to pass. And at that moment, and this is, I read this the first time a decade ago, and I'll read a note that I put in myself. This is not hubris. He is simply following the bliss of his instruction as a given. When you follow your bliss, the people around you will say you're hubristic, you're inflated. It's not inflation, it's grandiosity. Huge difference. You're just following your path. Having decided, he assumed the stance of an archer, and he starts shooting everyone, and just basically all hell breaks loose. And here we are in the world as we are now, as a result of this initial position, sort of state of affairs. And so in the context of this, sort of an hour after the Big Bang, basically, right? This is how desire gets introduced and whipped up out of nowhere for no good reason. Dawn comes out of Brahma out of no good reason, and then desire pops up right next to her, and then all hell breaks loose. Because Brahma speaks the truth. He could say, well, I'm going to be exempted from this. It's like, in truth, nothing is exempted from this. This is the one thing at play with itself. This is the beauty of the world. So in this context, when we read, because that's like all good, but day to day, I'm like, oh, the Iliad and the Odyssey and mythopoetics, and I'm in the world following my bliss, helping people find their bliss, and blah, blah, blah. This is great. So, I'm outside the walls of Troy, like, getting down, right? And then you read the story where it's like, yeah, all of that, Helen is just, she's a hologram inside the walls of Troy. And I'm like, what? Like, from me, the guy who, like, reading some obscure passage in book 12 of the Odyssey, I'll be moved to tears, which is just a footnote of the original conflict in Troy. And all of that is an illusion, and not in a bad way. Oh, like, it's pointless. It's like, no, it is illusory. It takes me all the way back to the mystical, not even beginnings, because there is no time either, the mystical core of everything. So here, then, the significance of me of the Helen story is the element of desire, not just romance, flowers and chocolate for Valentine's Day, but this deeper level of desire that is basically what takes us from the undifferentiated ground of being, the Tao, right, all the way fast forward, right, into this entire blasting, explosive world of light, sound, touch, taste, feeling, desire, fear, threat, and control. Love, nurturing, and surrender, sacred and profane, all of it. The flowers, on the bush, the pebbles on the sidewalk. All life is created by desire, which is what we learn from the Hindu system, which is the different actions of Maya, which is the action of desire. I'll say, for the sake of completeness, just for the record, a bit about Maya here as well. So here, when this happens, this is the birth of desire, is also the birth of Maya. Okay. And of course, out of Maya, one of the things that comes out of Maya is also the antidote to the whole thing, which reveals, because Maya is the mother of Buddha, right? Who is the agent of the quenching of the fire. So the three functions of Maya is, one, it is like, it is a shattering function, right? So it is an obscuring function. So it's like a mountain lake. When you look at it, it reflects the trees and the mountains and the sky above it. You drop a pebble into it. The trees and the mountains and the sky are still the same, but your image of it is shattered into a million, 10,000 things, billion different pieces. You start thinking justice and injustice, books and bills that come in, the sky, clouds, rain, all of these different things are the facets of the thing that is shattered. So the shattering of the one thing into seemingly many is the first function of Maya. The second function is concealing. So in the shattering, like, because you can see, because at the actual mountain lake, you see that it's shattering, but you're like, yeah, I can just lift my eyes a couple of degrees and see the actual thing. But the shattering function of Maya is so alluring with the help of desire that it conceals the true nature. Your eyes, you cannot, it's like social media, you can't tear your eyes away from the glistening thing. And you forget that the true mountains are right there. Okay. And then the third function of Maya is the revealing function. Because when you become aware of the action of Maya itself, right? So when you actually find, a teacher or an insider or whatever, that helps you name this mechanism and phenomenon Maya, and you can actually see the action, you're able to see through it, back through to the nature of reality. So you either look up and see the mountains and the trees in the sky, or you look at the fragmented thing, but because you know how it's fragmented, you can see it as the fragmented thing, or you can see it as the one thing. Right? And that's one of the hallmarks of, I don't know if you want to call it enlightenment, awakening, or whatever. You can zip back and forth as you please. Right? Because there's no difference. Right? It was like years ago, someone from the Silicon Valley, Northern California, non-duality movement, like grabbed me for a cup of coffee, and they were like talking about this and that. And after a while, I just looked at them and I was like, because it's this adorable kind of irony, right? It's like you're having these conferences and writing these books and funding these companies all to try to attain non-duality. It's like, oh, I must attain non-duality because I cannot stay in the state of duality. I hate duality. I must go to non-duality. And I'm like, right. And at one point I was just like, I don't know, dude, like, what's wrong with duality? It's like we're sitting there eating our sandwiches in this fancy cafe. It's like, if we didn't have duality, I would not taste the aioli spread on my delicious sandwich. And he was just like, he just looked at me and all the blood drained out. And he was like, holy fuck. And I never heard from him again. I never heard from him again. And I'm like, bless you. So anyway.
It is this, so in India, in ancient India, right?
Yeah.
So non-duality is called Advaita, and then sort of there's Shankaracharya, who kind of gave a long exposition on Advaita, based on Vedanta and everything. And then you also have other movements and other sampradayas, they call it, of the tradition, where Madhvacharya is saying, oh, well, we've heard a lot about Advaita, and let me talk to you about Dvaita. and from one of those traditions, like in Bhagavata Purana, because we're talking about Maya, I felt like sharing that story, which I mentioned at the beginning, right? Yeah. Where so Vishnu is walking in the countryside somewhere in the wilderness with his favorite companion Narada, right? Narada is this sage, this rishi of the Devaloka, of the realms of the gods. He can travel between realms. He's actually Brahma's son, and he's the sage. So he's beyond all of these, whatever duality, non-duality, all that we're talking about. But he's a favorite friend of Vishnu. So Vishnu and Narada are walking. And Narada turns to Vishnu and says, can you show me the power of your Maya? And Vishnu is like, why do you want to know, of all people? Like, it doesn't matter to you. Why do you want to know? And Narada is like, I know, I'm just curious. I just want to see the power of Maya.
Yeah, he's like, hey, do that trick you do with that thing. He's like, are you sure?
Exactly, right? So he wants to know. So then he says, okay, it's a long story. I can show you, but it's gonna take time, and I'm thirsty. So do me a favor. Can you get me a glass of water? And Narada's like, okay, I'll be back. And he starts walking a little ahead to see if he can come across a pond or a lake or a river somewhere. And nothing. It's just very hot, and the sun's just beating down. He can't find a thing. He starts to feel thirsty himself, and he keeps walking in the hope of finding something, and finally comes to a village. Right, there are cottages, huts, and everything. It was like, oh good, now I can knock on the door, ask someone to just lend me a glass of water, and I can go back, and maybe I'll have a drink myself. And he knocks on the door, and the door opens, and he finds this absolutely stunning, beautiful woman who opens the door and is like, okay, what do you want? And Narada is just already, like, at first sight, he's fallen head over heels in love with this woman. And instead of asking for a glass of water, he says, will you marry me? He finds himself saying that, and just like, okay, but you'll have to talk to my dad, And soon enough, he's spoken to her father, he's convinced him, he's asked her hand in marriage, and they get married. Narada gets a house for himself in the village. He tends to the farm. They soon have kids. And the story goes on, and he's raising the kids, he's busy at the farm. He's just so completely blissfully settled in this life. And one day the river close by starts to flood, and the flood water comes into the village, and the water level starts to rise. And before he knows it, and people are in panic, everybody's running around, people are already swept away by the flood. His wife, his kids, they start to be swept away by the water. And Narada starts to cry out, trying to help, trying to hold on to his wife, trying to hold on to his children, pulling them to safety, but then they slip away and they go. Everything he's loved, everything he's living for is just slipping away, going away, out of his grasp. Starts to cry out in shock and pain and grief, and he says, Vishnu, please help me, please help me. And he opens his eyes, and Vishnu is standing there, and it's all the countryside where they were, and says, Narada, where's my glass of water? What are you doing? And so that was like, we told the story as kids. So don't worry, you find yourself getting too carried away by emotion over something, your anxiety, you're fighting this, you're getting worried about that. No, that is all Vishnu, and he's just having a laugh at you, okay? It's all right. It's all right. And we're like, yeah, what's the point then? Why should I study for my exams? It's like, so yeah, I was reminded of that. Artie, I think you're on mute. Sorry.
A great story of the action of Maya.
Yeah.
Fabulous.
Yeah.
And what I love, you can look at this Egyptian story, as a commentary on Greek civilization as too, right? It's like this rival, this junior cousin of a Greek civilization. Oh, their grand epic is all based on, an illusion. Ah ha 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 ha, right? But also, it's just like, I think it captures the Greek character in this beautiful mythopoetic way too, because the Greek spirit is the precursor for all of sort of modern Western spirit, right? Mm-hmm. The Greek spirit flows through the Roman spirit, right? Picks things up and which is the reaction of Menelaus mm-hmm. to finding out.
Yeah,
he just fought a 10-year war right? He's about to lose his brother Agamemnon, right?
Yeah.
And all of Greece has followed him into this disastrous war.
Yeah.
For 10 years, lost thousands of men, heroes and brothers, brave storms as one of the Nostoi, the returning heroes, for 7 years.
Yeah.
And then the god Hermes himself says, "Yeah, dude, it was all an illusion."
Mm.
I mean, like, I mean, obviously, but yeah, I mean, yeah, it was all an illusion. Did you know? Did you know? And to Menelaus' credit, instead of being like, "Are you kidding? I quit. I'm walking off stage. I'm not doing this anymore," Menelaus is like, "Oh, it was? Okay, well then, so what do I do next?"
Yeah. Yeah, I love
So
that about Menelaus. I love
He doesn't
it.
even blink. He just goes right to the next Narada. It's like Narada waking up and Vishnu going like, "Where's my glass of water?" Ha ha, touche. And then Narada going like, "Oh shit, your glass of water. I'll be right back." And he just goes. Right? And that's the Greek spirit. It's like, yeah, you can talk to me about the larger cosmos and Tartarus and the pre-Olympian sort of pantheon and everything. But at the end of the day, we are here now. And we are the sons and daughters of the Olympians. We are saddled up and we are going.
Yeah. Yeah. Which is what was fabulous for me about Menelaus, the last bit particularly, where, after all of this, and Hermes tells him, yes, your wife is here, she's safe. You can find her, I'll tell you where to find her. And you'll go and, you claim her and take her back. No, we're not done. There's that one last bit.
Yeah.
We've got to fight off suitors.
Yeah.
Just like Odysseus, when he reaches Ithaca, it's not like he just walks in straight into the palace and tells Penelope, "Hey, I'm home." Like there are all these suitors, and
there's always another twist.
There's always something.
Yeah.
So this almost feels like, this story too, in the way it's kind of fitted itself in. This feels like Menelaus's own The Odyssey, right? I don't know what you would call it. And he comes back home, claims Helen, and there's still something to do. There's still something more to do.
Yeah.
And amidst all this, we're being told all of this is a dream. All of this is an illusion. Everything you believed in, everything you fought for was an illusion. And he's like, okay, yeah, what's the next quest?
Yeah, and it's funny. There's a funny contrast there to be made with his brother Agamemnon, right? Where it's like, with Agamemnon, it's much more this feeling of brute force linearity, right?
Yeah.
I need to kill my daughter to get the winds going. Done. Right.
Yeah.
I need to do this. I need to sack this temple, even though it's a sacrilege. Done. And he goes home and everything's fine. He's the first one home practically. And his wife is waiting there to kill him in the bathtub, And it's just, it's interesting. The linear and fastest route, even if you succeed in getting it, you want to be careful. You want to be careful with that.
Yeah.
Okay. What else? Anything else?
So for me, it's like this is just brilliant in the sense that we read this entire story and all of these. I was hoping that, this was the expectation because we've been doing the psychological level of myth reading all these days. I'm like, okay, what does Hathor mean? What does Helen mean? And what does Menelaus mean? And everything, and then you bring this aspect of everything is driven by desire. Yeah. And even if I had to go back into the psychological level, for me, I'm like, yes, of course, everything is driven by desire, which is why it feels so great to be following your bliss. It's like, it feels like you're finally in touch with what forms the foundation of our reality, as we were talking. There is a reality, which is, we talk about in Tao Te Ching, there's just only one thing. And then there is our reality, where there are 10,000 things and we're chasing different things. But to then center ourselves back around our bliss feels so good, because we're not just in touch with that oneness, but we're also in touch with the thing that moves the oneness, that is the desire. So
right, and that's the thing with like duality and non-duality. Right? Non-duality or duality is non-duality. You don't have to do anything because there is only one thing. When you're eating your sandwich and you're tasting the delicious garlic aioli and all these contrasts of textures and flavors, that is non-duality.
right.
Right. And so when you realize that and experience it firsthand as this dual human, you zip in and out of the mode however you want. And this to me is the basis of the mythic archetype of the in Hindu and Buddhist traditions, the bodhisattvas, right? Now, I wasn't going to mention this because I thought I mentioned this here, but I think I mentioned it in the Muse cohort or the manifestation cohort. I'll just give the thumbnail here, which is basically, the tradition of the bodhisattvas is that they are Buddhas who have already achieved, so they full escape, they can leave us, all of us suckers behind. And out of the infinite depths of their compassion, they don't quite cross the line of ascending and turning into like purple jello. They hold back and they say, until all living beings who suffer are liberated, we will not liberate either. Okay.
Yeah.
So they work tirelessly through all eternity to liberate all suffering beings, right? And so I would say in some ways in the profane, we're like, oh my gosh, they're so morally upright and they're a model for me, and I'm just this poor weak little human. I'll never be at their level. But it's like Christ. It's like you'll try to sort of attain, but you'll always fail, and that's fine. Okay, so that's one way of reading it, and it's not a wrong way of reading. That's not a bad way of reading it. But another way of reading it is basically to say, when they say, I won't fully enlighten until all living beings are rescued and saved, until the conflagration of the world itself is quelled. That means they will never enlighten, because you will never save all living beings. Right? And the reason you will never save all living beings is because the world as it is the one thing choosing to be at play with itself in all these 10,000 different manifestations. Right? And when you know that, you can go in and start playing with the manifestations according to your own need, want, and desire. Right? But I mean, the point of the Bodhisattva tradition for me is that on one level, you can read it as, oh, they have such infinite compassion for us poor, wretched little beings. And another way of reading it is that they have already enlightened. They know that every little wretched ant or cockroach or whatever is also them. There is no difference. So that when they say, oh, I will not enlighten until everyone is saved, they know everyone's not going to. They know they will never enlighten in this dual structure. And it doesn't matter, because they already know that they are already there. They already know that all the unsaved beings, on fire are already the one thing. The world, I mean, another way of saying it, the world in all its wonder and horror is already perfect as it is. So why do you do what you do? For me, it's like, why do I still do this healing work? I'm not going to heal everyone, right? I do it as a love letter to the world. I do it for no good reason. I do it as a part of my bliss. Right? And a love letter in the sense of, I love the world as it is without condition. The world does not have to be a just world for me to love it. Just like I love my kids without condition. My kids do not have to be good kids, obedient kids for me to love them. I love my children without condition. And ideally, I love myself without condition as well. Blah, blah, blah. And so bringing all of this down to like the Menelaus thing, where it's like, he's just been told that his entire life and potentially all of Greek civilization is like illusory. And for, you know, the non-dualists of Silicon Valley, they maybe like throw this sort of, you know, entitled male hissy fit of like, well, this is just all pointless. I'm just going to like descend into nihilism, a fit of nihilism, right? Menelaus is like, you know, it doesn't even cross his mind. It's not stupid. It's like, yeah, everything, all of my entire civilization is potentially based on illusion. Yeah, whatever. What's the next round? Because I will win the next round too. Because that is what I'm here to do, and I will do it.
Yeah.
He's a good king. He's a good king in that sense. He's a good king.
Give this analogy. We always give this analogy of watching a movie. And
yeah,
if someone tells you, hey, look, you're just watching a movie. This is just a movie. And you're like, shut up. I know that.
I know that. I paid $20 to be here.
Yeah.
You don't want to like go out and get me popcorn while you're at it. I'm enjoying myself.
I remember this, I mean, years ago, you had told me this, like the reason enlightened sages and seers and masters don't go around telling people, hey, this is all an illusion, is precisely this. They don't want to spoil the movie for anyone because they've all paid to come to this movie. And
yeah, they're trying to be polite and not be a jerk. Yeah.
Yeah, people just get annoyed. Like, yeah, don't tell me this. I know it's all an illusion, but I'm here for the game anyway.
That's why everything I teach, I'm like, it's only if you want.
Yeah.
You know, if this helps you like come out of whatever, I'm not gonna like browbeat you into it. It's like, first of all, if you do it only under force of this, it's uninteresting to me.
Yeah.
You know, because any school marm can like scare you into doing this thing. For me, it's like I only want the people who are like, yeah, I'm fine, but yeah, tell me a little more. Tell me a little more. I'm like, all right, let's go. That's more resonant for me because that's kind of how I came to it. I generally don't like to be told what to do, right? So when someone comes at me where I'm like, well, what's next then? What's next then? I'm very enchanted by that, and that's the way I like to give it to other people as well. Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
So what's the exercise then?
Okay. So the exercise, again, only if you want. Prompt for journaling, reflection, or whatnot when you're alone, is what is the role of desire in your life? Or the three levels of will: need, want, and desire. Right? How has it led you forward in your life? Right? If you start to think about how the three levels of will have propelled you forward in your life, you realize the entire phantasmagorical movie of your life has been singularly driven by the triumvirate of these three forces. Right? This force of will at the levels of need, want, and desire is the thing that is stirring the pot of your life. If there were no desire, nothing would change. And instead of the swirl we see around us, it would be stillness. It would be the oneness of the world. And it would be the absence of desire. And honestly, that would be okay too. That would be okay too. Okay, so that's the exercise. Where are we? Let me pull this up here. Okay, I think that's all we had. And yeah, that's it for the exercise. Okay, so now I'll go ahead and close our session. So thank you so much for joining. Our next session is April 2nd. It's free. It's open to the public. Please feel free to invite others only if you want. And I'll put the link to sign up in the Crowdcast and in the Facebook. Okay. And I will go ahead and close the session. So I hereby close the session of our shared sacred space. Thank you for sharing the space with me, and thank you for sharing the nourishment, the emotional nourishment and the spiritual nourishment of the shared sacred space with us. I give you my blessing. Go in peace, bestowed with blessing, free of fear, free of threat, and free of the undue control of others. Have a great Sunday. Have a great month. Until I see you next. And we will talk to you soon. Happy Sunday, everyone. Thank you. Thank you.